Thank you for joining us for today's podcast. We're joined by Rob Devlin of Smile Brands, and we're talking about what Smile Brands learnt in terms of talent attraction after the pandemic and during it. I hope you enjoy this interview.
What's happening at the minute, Peter, in private equity in particular, is obviously a lot of big PE houses are just buying up massive amounts of healthcare businesses. So I think we're going to see a real shift in terms of the narrative around, talent scarcity just being not just within the tech space.
Do you see, have you got any view on why the PE guys are coming into healthcare so much then? I mean, there's a lot of value and revenue in it, but in the US, it strikes me as a very low margin sector.
Yeah, so I think there are a few different things that are basically playing out. So I think that, first of all, PE houses are finding healthcare in general a really, really lucrative business because they can sort of come in, cut costs, negotiate bigger deals with insurance companies, and make their model really appealing to dentists that traditionally have had to fight hand and tooth to run their own independent private business. And obviously, one of the challenges that you have as a dentist is that, you spend 8 hours with your hand down somebody's mouth, and then you once you finish doing that, you're then going into a back office, and you're having to administrate the business, or you've got teams of people that are trying to do that for you. And really, most dentists want to just treat patients. So I think the DSO model is becoming more popular because of that. So a DSO is the term given to these large conglomerates of businesses that operate hundreds of dental. So, in the olden days, Dr. Devlin, I would graduate, I'd buy a house and I'd put some surgeries in there, and that would be my dentistry business. That's the old way that the dentistry sector works. Now there are huge global organizations like Bupa, like My Dentist, like Smile Brands, like Heartland, that go about buying those Mr. Devlin's practices and then rebranding them and operating them from a centralized model. And in doing that, they can obviously drive, greater margins. They can, provide the dentist with better support and so on and so forth. The second thing, which I think is a big factor, is that the new generation of dentists that are coming into the market from school are absolutely laden with debt more than ever. So therefore, they find that the opportunity to go into this more corporate dentistry with all the benefits that are being offered far more appealing and advantageous than, setting up their own business with all the associated financial burden. It's just a more attractive process. So that, I think, is, a really, really big thing. And
so is the market then, Rob? Because we've never actually talked about this. So you've got that kind of traditional dentist model. I still remember mine. It was a horror show, right, from when I was a kid. Is that traditional model more lucrative than the new model, but actually just the burden of administration is what's putting people off?
I don't know whether it is, to be honest. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if there are any hard facts to prove one way or the other, because I guess each of those, the success of each of those individual private businesses depends on so many different things. So, obviously it depends on the patient demographic, where the location of the practice is fundamentally, because, you could have Jessica opens a private practice in Beverly Hills and her customer is like a multi-billionaire tech investor that just wants new teeth. But Eddie opens a practice, in a really low socioeconomic area of downtown Los Angeles, and his patient is like a meth head who's basically going to have his teeth replaced on Obamacare. So all of those factors would come into play in terms of how profitable the business would be. I think the other factor that's come into play are the numerous challenges within the current economy. So the cost of delivering dental services is rising in context of the increased cost of materials, lab fees, workforce wages, property leases. All of those things are obviously being affected by the economic climate, which is again making it less advantageous for people to open their own private business. So I think
this
those
consolidation
are all
is so how far along is this consolidation? Because as you say, I understand Bupa Dental, but in the US, is there still a lot of these independent practices that are being bought up?
Yeah, there are. Yeah, so I think Smile Brands is one of the 4 largest conglomerates in the US. So we operate in the region of 700 practices. The biggest operate around about 1,000. So what's happening is there's a bit of a race amongst those DSOs to try and buy up the smaller failing dentistry offices, and get those in a more profitable way working.
And
I think
really, the money is coming from the insurers. That's where the value is in the relationships with the insurers, presumably.
correct. Yeah, essentially that's where it is.
When you went to Smart Brands, did you see different talent challenges there than you'd seen in dentistry in the UK?
Broadly, they're the same. I think the challenge ultimately boils down to supply and demand, and I believe that there is just not enough dentists coming out of dental schools to meet the rising requirements of growth in population. Not enough dentists, there's not enough hygienists, there's not enough dental assistants. So at a very, very strategic level, what the sort of governing bodies of this industry are trying to do is to engage people at a much earlier life stage around why is this an attractive vocation? How do you get into the vocation? How can we increase access to people that may be coming from lower socioeconomic backgrounds that can't afford to go to university? How can we support people that come from segments of, D, E, and I that would generally be, less privileged and not as able to access the type of training? So at a super strategic level, there's all of those kind of conversations that are going on, which we're participating in. But at the front line, there is just an absolute crunch of everyone is fighting to pick up talent. And, there's crazy wage inflation, there's crazy amounts being offered for doctors and hygienists to just come and work, crazy sign-on bonuses, pathway to ownership type M&A deals. There's just loads and loads and loads of hyper competition going on within the sector to try and get people signed up.
I mean, I have to say, it is by a factor of probably 10 the most challenging market we've ever worked in is Armstrong Craven, because that competition is so incredibly fierce. So Rob, going back to when you joined Smile Brands and you kind of walked in the door, what did you find from a TA perspective?
So what I found was that up until the point I'd arrived, so really up until the point of the pandemic, the TA function had operated in quite a self-governing way. So there hadn't been too much concern about the company's ability to attract and recruit candidates, because the business had an excellent reputation culturally, just a great place to work. So it had got the highest ratings on Glassdoor. The CEO had got one of the highest approval ratings of any CEO in the sector. And the business traded very much off the back of that to fill vacancies. We didn't really struggle to recruit because I don't think the recruitment goals as such were quite as aggressive. And then essentially the impact of all of this was that they ended up in a situation where they had 423 fewer clinical professionals in the business at the end of the pandemic than they did at the start. We were like, look, we need to come up with a plan that's going to deliver these 423 net heads back to the business. And to do that, we had to put in place some really, really ambitious targets around hiring. So for the first time, we had to say, look, in order for us to turn the business around, we need to recruit over 1,000 of these professionals this year, which is a number way higher than the business has ever delivered. So to do that, ultimately where we need to start is by agreeing those goals and breaking that down as to what that looks like on a recruiter to recruiter level, and then agreeing, actually, how do we then put the process and rigor in place for them to deliver it? And that's part of the reason why we engaged Armstrong Craven, was because I wanted to run a parallel project to say, if we get a real world leading RPO talent intelligence company working alongside us, what can we learn about our internal capability versus, quote, an external higher capability organization, to help me then understand, okay, so is it just purely down to our capability, and might it be that actually we need to consider a different operating model? Or is it actually a case of this is just really, really hard, and whoever we get doing it, we're going to sort of run into the same problems?
And that's what we did. So again, we were looking at dentists, dental hygienists, and dental assistants, weren't we? And we picked a territory where we knew that it had been challenging, which was the northeast of the US. So Boston, Massachusetts, and surrounding. It wasn't exclusively there, was it, Rob? But it was predominantly around there.
Yeah.
And what Armstrong Craven, what we were brought in to do is to map the talent in those locations, so map the talent across those three disciplines in locations where Smile Brands had an office, primarily where Smile Brands had an office which wasn't populated, so it wasn't open. And we then set about reaching out to all of the people. So we mapped and did outreach and tried to engage with talent, and then brought them back to Smile Brand. We're looking for tech talent in underrepresented groups, which is often female tech talent. Our response rate is 3 to 5%. That's the hardest tech talent to find. These guys, it was 10 times harder to get a dentist of any gender than it is to get female tech talent. So what I think we helped to do, Rob, what we were able to do is to give Smile the data. We were able to make some placements, but we're also able to give Rob and help Rob present to his CEO the data that just proved how hard this population was to engage with.
We know that, dentists and hygienists in the US, they're getting 10, 12, 14, 15, 16 emails and text messages a day, from 16 different companies a day, offering them more and more and more wild, offers of employment. So the mindset then of the people within that population is that they want more and more and more. And actually, the reality of it is most people don't want to leave where they're working. They're generally quite happy because the primary reason they'll choose to work somewhere is location. So how much of a commute is it to get me to, door to door? And then what is my ability to earn really decent dollars? And actually, on an office to office basis, you can probably earn, there's probably not that much in it. You're going to earn a certain amount of money unless you're in a really low socio-demographic area or a really remote area, which unfortunately some of our practices are located in very rural parts of America where it's just geographically disparate. So there is literally no talent on the ground. The other big challenge that we had was that we just didn't have a pipeline of talent. So everything is entirely reactive. We didn't have a pipeline of graduate talent. We didn't really have any, pipeline of military talent or any of the other kind of big traditional pipelines that you would have within the TA space in the US. So we're having to kind of like start a strategy from ground zero. We're coming into a graduation period now, and we've worked really hard to try and build a pipeline in certain key locations. But again, that's kind of been a big challenge. And I think moving forward, it will become a really big part of how we recruit, military and grad talent.
Statistically, it's 10 times as hard.
Yeah, so like for me, that's like a really interesting storyline for most people within the recruiter space. Yeah. I think
if you thought it was hard to recruit in tech, come over here and look. So the work that we did for you, Rob, that data that we were able to present to Steve, who's the CEO, and that you helped us sort of frame the story around. What has that meant in terms of activity or different? What have you been able to do differently as a result of that in your role?
Well, I think it's allowed us to have more impactful conversations about the scale of the challenge, because obviously the data gives a lot more weight to how we're articulating. I think it's helped us make more informed decisions over, whether or not it is team capability or whether it is, what we're doing, and refine the processes and the way we're approaching stuff. So I think that's been the second thing. I think it's helped inform a lot of other broader strategic conversations in the business around like disposals and M&A and that kind of stuff, and whether it's sustainable for us to operate businesses within these more remote locations. It's informed our graduate recruitment strategies. It's helped us understand, where do we need to build strategic pipelines of talent. It's informed so many different things, to be honest. And then at the end of the campaign, Armstrong Craven pivoted away from what the initial brief was to undertake more of a mapping exercise to do with future talent, which again has helped us pinpoint, and define more of a strategy to go after,
we
graduates.
Made a start on looking at some of the graduate populations, didn't we? And looking particularly at the people that could be key advocates in some of the dental schools for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
So,
he's helped in like a multitude of ways. So even as a strategy consultant, you're having to kind of like make decisions, pretty rapidly. So one of the biggest challenges is obviously always getting an angle on, is the team capable or not? So, working in parallel with external partners helps inform those sorts of judgments as well.
Thank you, Rob, for joining us for this podcast, and thank you for everybody listening to the episode. Please visit the Armstrong Craven website if you want to learn more about what we do and how talent research can help you make better informed business decisions.